former maths teacher, non-practicing clinical hypnotherapist, wait for it, chief executive of the Association of Project Management, which is the Chartered Institute for the Project Profession. Hello, and thank you for joining me on the Practical Leadership Podcast. My name is Paul Morton. I'm your host. We try to distill the hard-earned wisdom of CEOs, executives, and high performers around the world into actionable insights that you can take away and put into your leadership practices really quickly. If it's time for you to look at your own management teams and help move them from being accidental into being intentional, then in 9 short weeks, the Practical Leadership Playbook course will help you do just that. Check out the Practical Leadership Academy. And now, on with the show. Professor Dr. Adam Boddison, OBE, thank you very much indeed for joining.
Thank you for inviting me, Paul.
Now, that was a far too short-handed introduction to somebody like you. Can you do a better job for me?
Well, I'll try. It's funny, whenever somebody talks about my role as a former clinical hypnotherapist, especially if I'm on a stage at the time, I see all of these hundreds of people in the audience suddenly put their eyes down as if they're going into a hypnotic trance, but it's of course because they want to break eye contact immediately. It's like an impulse reaction. But so in terms of background, yes, I'm currently chief executive of the Association for Project Management. And before that, I was also chief executive of an inclusion charity called the National Association for Special Educational Needs. So I've probably done about 10 years as a CEO. My background, if I was trying to sum it up, I'd talk about that blend of education and enterprise, because as you said, I started out in teaching and research. I've worked in charities and professional membership associations. But for me, the thing that kind of brings it all together, my real passion, if you like, is that I love to be involved with organizations and to lead organizations that really improve society in some way. I talk about making the world a better place, kind of one day at a time, if you like. And if I can do that in my job, then that's the right place for me to be.
What's marvelous is the concept of ikigai. You may have come across that as you find something that you're good at, something that you're passionate at, something that adds value to society, and something you can get paid for. And right in the middle is this whole reason, purpose, meaning, value stuff. And it sounds like you've hit it in the head there.
I hope so, yes. I constantly reflect on making sure that I'm in the right place. Interestingly, when I was in school as like a 15-year-old, if you like, I remember being called to the careers advisor's office, and they say to you, what career would you like to do? And as a kind of logical thinking kind of guy, I looked at this careers advisor and I thought, well, you know all of the best jobs that are out there in the world, and you've chosen to be a careers advisor. So that must be the best one, right? So I probably said, well, I'd love to be a careers advisor, and was duly thrown out of said office. And the lesson I learned from that was actually, you've got to love the job you do. And it was quite clear to me that she didn't love the job by that interaction. And that's really been a driving force behind almost every decision I've made in terms of jobs going forward.
Or love the job you've got and you'll never work a day in your life, right?
Quite. No, I would say it's not a job, it's a way of life if you get it right.
Well, there you go. That's it. Or it's like that work-life balance myth. It's not a thing, it's an integration, I think.
Agreed. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I mean, there are people, and I know many of them, who go to work and they earn a wage and they go home again. But that's their balance. That's how they do it. They have it as a transactional part of their existence that pays their wages so they can spend time with their family. The other side is you bring work home and you're working till crazy hours in the morning because you either have to because you can't manage your time, or you're incredibly passionate about what you do and you love it.
Yeah, but I think there's a trade-off as well. So I think I'd probably fall into the bring work home category, definitely. But then equally, I work for the kind of organizations where, when it's the school play and I can't be there during the day, and there's other things that I need to be around for in what might be traditionally work time. You get that trade-off, because you're working other hours, you get that flexibility to be able to be with family at other times, which are traditionally harder. So I think all in all, probably work and home get a good deal, both of them in this setup.
So let's touch just on the Association of Project Management for a minute before we go any further here. It's the chartered body for the project profession. Now, my wife is a project manager, is an engineer by training. And they're a special breed. There are people who get things done. Now, she and I make a great partnership because I'm the strategist and she's the executor. She makes stuff happen. What is it you do? How do you represent this body? Who are you? What are you all about?
Yeah, so essentially we're a professional membership association, and that's made up of different parts. So there's a individual membership aspect of that. So we've got 45,000 individual members, and they might be people who are, in kind of C-suite type roles, kind of running billion pounds worth of projects in all kinds of sectors. I mean, you mentioned engineering, but sometimes it's in law, sometimes it's in financial services, IT projects, infrastructure, technology, communication, all kinds of different things. Healthcare, pharmaceuticals, development of the COVID vaccine, for example. This was project professionals driving that in the background. That's why we were able so quickly. So there's all those individual members. You've got those at one end, but equally you've got those who are right at the beginning of their journey. And what's interesting about the project profession is, unlike something like, I don't know, medicine, for example, where there's one route through, right? You go to medical school, you become a junior doctor, you kind of train, you become a qualified general practitioner, and then you can kind of specialize a pediatric consultant or something like that. There's only one route through. The project profession, there are many routes in. So you mentioned about engineering. You could have a career as an engineer, as an architect, as a surveyor, actually just as a sector specialist in some way. And you find that one day you wake up and you're doing projects. And then you think, I could do this so much better if I actually had the formal tools and techniques that come with this. So there's the individual side. We have got 500 corporate partners that we work with. And again, these are in lots of different sectors, big organizations like the BBC, like Google, Amazon, those, but then small organizations as well, are really niche in kind of the nuclear sector and things like this, and everything in between. And then last of all, we're a registered charity. So we exist for the public benefit. So, if I was listening to this podcast, I'd say, Adam, you said you care about society, and everything you've just described just sounds like corporate stuff, right? So what's the, and we have this strap line in the organization, which I absolutely love, which is, why do we care about projects? And it's because when projects succeed, society benefits. And that's that join up, and it plays into that core charitable object that we had, which is existing for the public benefit.
That alludes neatly to the core challenge I think many of the people who are listening to this will be suffering, which is this gap between the grand plan and getting stuff done. So you've got, let's say, society, whether it's an HS3, 4, or 5, or an Olympic game, or building something of magisterial infrastructure, or simply realigning a government department, or building a house, or organizing your holiday. The gap between the plan and the execution, as I said before, my wife and I, and the gap between the two of us is basically, I come up with an idea and she tells me why we can't do it. If we don't have any money and I'm not organising you again, Martin, get yourself in gear is mostly the actual considered response. And if you're listening, darling, I apologise in advance. So this strategy execution gap, I think, is something that is vital that we fill, or that we make the connection between. So in your own journey of getting into the position of management, getting into the place that you are now, chief executive of an organisation that oversees the well-being of 45,000 members, where do you see that having come out? Where do you see that gap?
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting, isn't it? When I reflect on the differences between management and leadership, everybody wants to be a leader, but no one wants to be a manager. Management seems to have become some kind of dirty word somewhere along the way. And the byproduct of that is that project management, which is, if you like, more specialist again. So therefore, it's all, yeah, well, people think it's, there's like an image problem that it has, that people think maybe it's bureaucratic, or it's just all these templates and things. Why do I need to know about that? But if I reflect on my own journey, so I'd done 6 years as a chief exec before I came to my current role. And one of the things I committed to at my interview was, I said, I'm going to do these project management qualifications that we ask everybody else to do, right? I've got to live I've got to really live by what I'm saying. I want to understand this. And by the way, I didn't know it was going to pass, right? Because this is quite a specialist thing. I did them. And what I realized was there are some things in there in terms of tools and techniques that I was already using, but perhaps not in a formal, structured way. I'd kind of just learned by osmosis some of these things over time. But actually, more importantly, there was huge amounts of value from the project management tools and techniques that would help me to support effective strategy execution from the C-suite perspective. And it's the C-suite where I think it's really interesting. If we consider, for example, that most C-suites have a chief operating officer, for example, most of them do not have a chief transformation officer or a chief project officer. And I find that really fascinating, because if we consider that most businesses, and at least most leaders I talk to, most of the job they do is about change and a tiny amount about business as usual. And if that's the case, why does that not why is that not reflected, if you like, in the C-suite? So I think something is going to change there. I think it's already started to change, and it's that project management which is driving this strategy execution in the C-suite.
So I'm sitting in my C-suite with my exec team around me, and we're wondering why stuff's not happening. So we have the grand plan, we've had our offsites, etc., etc. We've paid McKinsey or whoever it is many millions of their monies to come up with some 50,000 page, whatever it is, document, and nobody's getting anything done. We're not executing. What would you advise? What would you simply advise to get started?
So I think there's a couple of different things. So the first thing I would suggest is a maturity assessment around the competence of project delivery. Because the reality is, whether it's a strategy or whether it's a change initiative, it's going to be delivered through a project or a program, as in a series of projects that's trying to kind of bring that change. And there's also the portfolio aspect of this, which is how do we decide what things are going to move the dial and what we park till later. All of these are technical skills that can be learned. So I think then about understanding within the organization, do we have the right skills, knowledge, and understanding? But more importantly, do we have the competence to be able to deliver on that knowledge, skills, and understanding? And this is where things like, so at APM, we have a competence framework. It's freely available on the web. Anybody can download it. And one of the things we encourage people to do at an individual level, but you can also do it as an organizational level, is to actually do that self-assessment, because then you know where your gaps are as an organization. You can invest from a kind of learning and development side of things to get the organization into a place where it can deliver. So I think that's the first thing. Do you have the competence to be able to deliver in the first place? Then once you know you've got that, it's then about, my mind, effective sponsorship. And this is really interesting. By sponsorship here, I'm talking about kind of the governance and accountability and oversight side of things. So it'll often be C-suite or board, certainly exec directors kind of overseeing kind of change projects and so on. What I find is that organizations have often invested in their project delivery side of things, but they haven't invested in making sure that their sponsors know how to be really effective sponsors. There's just an assumption that because someone's in a senior position, they must just know how to do that, right? And that might be true, but often it's not the case. So that would be the second place. You know, you've got the competence in place. And then the second part of the jigsaw is, now let's make sure that we have the right governance and sponsorship in place to make sure that we deliver on the things that we want to achieve.
It is that if you go into the conversations with the assumption that somebody knows something, nobody's ever going to tell you they don't. But if you go into the conversation with the assumption that they don't know something, people will agree with you that they don't. It's that wonderful, simple frame, I think. So we're going to be doing this magical project. We've got all these fabulous project managers. We're going to teach you how to be a good sponsor, because what you need to know are the following three things. Oh, okay, I'll learn that. We're going to need you to be a sponsor. Can you be a sponsor? Yeah, well, of course, I'm an executive. Don't you know? Look at the tie. Can't you tell? Every time. Whether it's the startiest startup or the most hidebound board, people are just afraid of looking like a fool. But if you go in with that assumption that I'm going to teach you or I'm going to help you to learn this, it takes somebody quite special and arrogant to say, no, I'm already a member of the APM. I don't need your help. Maybe that could be the case.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, actually. Doesn't want to get better at what they do. And if there's an opportunity to get better at whatever level you're at, then people generally try to grab hold of that with both hands. So yeah, I agree. The framing is important.
So it's that thread you mentioned right at the beginning, the combination, this confluence of education and enterprise. It's this continuous learning, it's this desire to continually improve, which leads to enterprises. I prefer the word company, actually, to organization or enterprise. And I know you work for an organization, it's not really a company, but the word, and I'll probably overuse this, but the word company comes from the people with whom you break bread. It's from Tan. You are in the company of other people, so you are in a group of people that you want to spend time with.
Yeah. Yeah, I went for enterprise mainly for the alliteration with education. So yeah, I take the feedback on board though. Thank you.
It rhymes. You're a poet and you don't know it. So if we're going to extend this then, so we've gone from identifying the competencies, the skills, the knowledge, the behaviors, the understanding, and then going and making sure we have comprehensive sponsorship, somebody who can actually say, yes, I'm responsible for this, I'm accountable for this, I don't need to be consulted, I don't need to be informed, whatever it is, that oversight, governance piece. How do we then put something into place that's going to be effective? What could be, give us an idea of how we can understand that even if we're doing something, we want an outcome.
Yeah. So when I was a maths teacher in school, I used to teach problem solving, and part of this was knowing when you had the right solution. I think this is translatable into business, by the way, because there's usually no shortage of ideas for things that we could do. The problem is, how do you know which is the right thing to do? And this is where some of this portfolio management comes into place. Or when you started doing it, how do you know it's working? And this 3-stage approach that we used in schools for children solving maths problems, I think is, as I say, applicable to business. And this was it. It said there are 3 stages to knowing you've got the right solution: convince yourself, convince a friend, and convince an enemy. So how does this work in a business context? Sorry. So first of all, you've got your idea, your solution. You've got to reflect on it yourself. People are quite quick to come out and say, this is the answer. And of course, when the leader says that, sometimes that can influence what everybody else thinks as well. As the leader, he must be right. So I think there has to be that period of self-reflection. Am I really confident that this is the right way to go? Let me road test it myself and really stretch that idea around. Then there's kind of share it maybe with your close confidants. It could be your leadership team. It could be, coach or a mentor, whoever that is that you have around you. So friendly people who are going to give you the kind of critical friend feedback and say, or actually, have you thought about this or what about that? Or it'd be much better if you did it this way. And then the last bit is you want to pick somebody who is probably the person you'd least want to do business with, the person who's deliberately provocative, finds holes in everything. When we talk about glass full or glass half empty, I mean, they've tipped their glass down the sink, right? It's this kind of person. You want to say to them, what do you think of this idea? And if you can convince them that it's a great idea, then I think you're really onto something. You're onto something that you can sell to the organization, and you can probably sell externally as well.
Outstanding. Convince yourself, convince your friend, convince your enemies. It goes, I think that's a lovely tool. It's a pragmatic tool to use. And you mentioned at the beginning, earlier on, that there are these technical skills that we overlook because project management is dirty. Management is dirty. I want to be a leader. I want to be the great chic of the week or whatever it is, so you can follow me into the sunset. But if I don't know how to actually make things happen, all I'm doing is shouting into the wind. And the definition of a leader with no followers, just a guy going for a walk.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say is leaders need to focus on the benefits. And this is when I come back to the sponsorship role that we talked about before. It's not enough just to deliver what was in the plan. Sometimes we have a great expression for this that we use they use in the Netherlands, which is when you've got a project which has delivered everything it set out to deliver. It was on time, within budget, to the required quality standards and everything else, but delivers no benefits. Maybe because it's an IT project and the problem it's trying to solve doesn't exist anymore because the world has moved on. That kind of situation. And this expression they use in the Netherlands is, yes, the operation was successful, the patient is dead. I really love this expression. It really made me laugh the first time I heard it. But I think this is where the role of the sponsor is so important, because they're the people who have got that eye in and out, if you like. So they've got one eye on the delivery and is it doing everything we said we were going to do, but another eye saying, when it's finished, is it still going to deliver the benefits that are intended? And if not, then why are we still doing it?
I mean, that alone, I think that insight alone is definitely worth the episode. Yeah, we're done. We can go home now. Then you're coming up with some great stuff here. This is really, really valuable. If you had to then share just one message with everyone out there, whether it's in the non-for-profit or in industry or public sector, whatever it is, what would that one message be? What's your 10,000 billboard message?
Oh, well, I've got many messages I would like to give. I mean, one of the things is about picking your battles, because there are lots of things that you could, choose to tackle as a leader. There's no shortage of issues or opportunities. But I always say there's a sweet spot when you pick your battles. They've got to be small enough to win, but big enough to make a difference. And if they don't fall into that sweet spot, I tend to leave them alone, because you're either picking a fight that you can't win, and that just creates more noise, or there's no point. And there's this sometimes someone once pitched this to me as, Adam, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If you're pushing constantly to make something better, if there's a kind of law of diminishing returns here after a certain point, and I think that falls into that same thing around pick and battle. So I think that's probably the number one I would go for. Am I allowed to have two?
Of course.
Oh, I'll go for a second one then. And this is something which I have to kind of consciously try to do, which is to, if you like, judge people by their intentions rather than their actions, or mostly by their intentions rather than their actions. Because I think sometimes you've got people who try to do the right thing, but don't quite get it right, and they need some help to get there. Do we want to penalize those people, or do we want to help them? And there's a certain leadership style, I think, which is, they've got it wrong. Let's throw the book at them, followed by the bookshelf type thing. And then there's another type of approach which says, actually, they've made a great start in this. How do we get them to do it even better next time? I think it's don't judge people by their intent. Well, sorry, do judge people by their intentions and not necessarily always by their actions.
I think there's it feeds into a couple of things. One is that you want to build on strengths rather than weaknesses, because you make a bigger impact.
Definitely.
And there's a lovely story, I think it's from Dale Carnegie, and he quotes this story of a chap going into the office of his big boss and saying, I've just lost us $2 million. I just screwed up. Here's my resignation. And the big boss takes the resignation letter, rips it in half and says, you're kidding. I just spent $2 million in your education. Do you think I'm going to throw you out? So that's your starting point. It's taking the intent as strengths. It's taking the opportunity as strength. It's building rather than rushing. I like that approach. I like that.
I also think there's something about taking advice from places where you might least expect it to come from. I always remember in one of my jobs, we were developing an EDI policy, equity, diversity, and inclusion policy, and we had this document. It was like 20 pages long, and it covered like everything you could possibly imagine around diversity and inclusion and equity. Really detailed stuff about what we expected, what we didn't expect, and so on, and setting the standard. And I gave it to my 10-year-old daughter at the time. So, what do you think about this? Have a look to see what you think. It's just a youngster's perspective. It took her quite a while to read through it, right? I mean, she's 10. But she gave it back to me with this Post-it note on it. And it said, this is all fine, Dad, but you don't need all of this. You just need one sentence. You just need to say, don't judge people and be kind. So we made that the executive summary of this policy. And do you know what happened? Whenever I talk to anybody in that organization about what's our approach to EDI, don't judge people and be kind, that was the one thing they remembered. And that was the least place I expected to get such brilliant advice from. So people in particular are just very good at cutting through the crap, to be honest. They'll just say, look, this is what is really matters here. So I've not that I try and bump all of my work off to the youngsters, but I do try and get advice from young people where I can, because they often have a really refreshing way of looking at things, which I think we can learn from.
Is there an event, is there a mistake or something? There's something that's happened that has maybe taught you the most?
Yeah. Really good question. I suppose one of the things that comes to mind immediately is probably when I did my first CEO role. And it's a big moment. You want to get it right. And it was a charity, relatively small charity, but they were losing money. They were losing money because their business model was fundamentally flawed. And I was trying to really get to grips with what this underpinning kind of commercial issue was. But I quite quickly came to realize that the issue wasn't totally a commercial issue. Part of the issue was a values issue. And what happened was the chair of the board of this organization essentially had a values base which was misaligned. So this was an inclusion charity. And you had this chair who I'm sure was very good in his heyday, but effectively he was like, the embarrassing uncle of the party who says all the really inappropriate comments, and you're like, well, I'll just distance myself. So, in his mind, he was doing nothing wrong, right? Grew up in a particular era, but actually there's not really a place for that in today's society, and particularly not a place for that when you're running an inclusion charity and you're chairing the board. And I was in my probation period as a, new CEO. And so I thought, how do I deal with this? I haven't dealt with anything like this before. So I decided to, in my mind, I've always got this mantra of do what's right rather than what's easy. And I thought, okay, I'll have this conversation. And when I had the conversation with this guy, he kind of said, well, look, your days are numbered here because I'm not going anywhere and I'm not going to change what I'm doing. And, who are you to tell me to do, kind of thing. And I at that moment, I thought, I've really messed up here. I've made a big mistake. I have no authority to remove, effective my line manager effectively. So I thought, what do I do? So I thought, well, I need to consult the wider board. And so I started having those conversations. What came out was that everybody was kind of aware of this, but nobody had really wanted to tackle the problem. But now it was a real problem. There was an opportunity to do something about it. And to be fair to the board, they did do something about it, and they moved that chair on, and we got a brilliant new chair in. She's still there now, effectively, and the organisation's doing very well. And at the moment we made that change, the commercial fortunes of the organisation also changed. I like to say it was also down to some of the good commercial decisions I make as well. But that values piece, I think, can't be kind of underestimated. But, I know a big part of this podcast is the kind of real practical aspect of things. And what I would say is I used a particular reflection technique, ethical reflection technique, if I call it that, during that period, to kind of sense check myself. Am I really doing the right thing here? Is this career making or career breaking? What's going on? And it was a bit touch and go for a while. And that tool I call the 3P filter. Paper, parent, pillow. So it's 3 questions you can ask yourself to check you're doing the right thing. So the first one is, if it's almost the kind of Daily Mail test, if everything that I know in making this decision was published on the front page of a national newspaper along with the decision I've made, and everyone in the general public kind of knows it, right? And I step out my front door and everybody's going to judge me for this. Am I confident that I've made the right decision? The second one is the parent test, which is, imagine as a parent, you had to give advice to your child who is in this dilemma. What advice would you give to them? And the idea is that you hold your children or close friends to a higher ethical bar than you might hold yourself to. So I think that's quite interesting. And the easiest one of all, the pillow test, the sleep test. Can you sleep easy at night with the decision that you've made? And I used that during that period, and it really helped to kind of keep me on track, really, to make sure I got there. And by the way, I used this as a story that I shared when I went for my next CEO job. And I wasn't sure, when you say to your next chair, I removed my last chair, you never know how that's going to play in an interview. But actually, it told me a lot about the values base of the organisation I then went to, where they said, actually, we would expect you to do the same here if that happened. So that really started us off on a good foot, actually.
That's outstanding. Really, really good. I do like that a lot. We're coming in for a landing here. So is there a book or a podcast or something that you recommend or gift more than any?
Oh, a good question. I suppose in terms of books, I mean, I try to read in the morning for kind of development, if you like, and read in the evening for, I don't know, fiction type stuff, just to kind of, wind down, if you like. But so in terms of my morning books, one which I read about a year ago, which I still think about now, which I really like, is Hannah Fry's book, How to Be Human in the Age of the Mean. So Hannah Fry, if you don't know her, she's a Cambridge mathematician. She often appears on, panel programs like Have I Got News for You and those types of things. So you might recognize her. She's a very witty kind of writer, but she talks about AI and data, obviously really topical, but she's got these great quotes in there. So the one that really struck me, which I remember, she talks about people being scared about, AI robots becoming sentient and kind of taking over the world, and humans are kind of going to become inferior to the robots. And she said, she's like, that's a risk. But it's not going to be happening anytime soon. She's like, it's a bit like worrying about overcrowding on Mars. Yeah, it's a risk. It could happen, but it's not today's risk, right? So I love that book, and I've read it a couple of times. There's definitely one that I recommend.
Overcrowding on Mars. I love that. Thank you. Adam, how can people find you? What should they do if they decide that the APM is for them?
So in terms of APM, if you want to find out more about APM, our website is apm.org.uk, and they can find out there about membership, chartership, qualifications. They can become part of the community. If you're running a business, we'd love you to become a corporate partner. So do find out more information on the website. In terms of me personally, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Adam Boddison. I'm also on X and various other platforms as well. But LinkedIn is probably the main one I use for kind of business discussions, and tend to post some quite interesting things. The latest one, by the way, which is just really getting traction, just to finish, is I've noticed that the program Suits, that was made by Netflix, they did a great job in making the legal profession really attractive, and the dramatic side of it, the sexy side of law, if I call it that. I'm thinking, where's the Netflix program about projects? So I have written to the CEO of Netflix to ask whether they would do something in this space based on an idea that I had at an event last week. So that there's a discussion happening about that on LinkedIn at the moment, which I'm sure your listeners would be very welcome to join if they so wish.
Well, we'll put a link to that and all the other things you mentioned there and put that into the description. Professor Dr. Adam Boddison, OBE, Chief Executive of the Association of Project Management, and all-round good egg. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for joining me. If there's ever anything I can do to help you on your journey, then do please reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn and all the usual sources. Do please subscribe, leave me your 5-star review, and most importantly, get in touch with your comments and feedback. It's really how I grow, and that's what I'm doing this for. Thanks again.